Another day, another story. The carnage of the war was so extreme that historians have had difficulty agreeing on exactly how many people lost their lives.
Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel.
When European nations squared off against each other in the summer of 1914, it's doubtful that anyone envisioned it would mushroom into a 4-year-long conflict that would be vastly more lethal than any previous war on that continent, both for military personnel and civilians. Major powers such as Britain, France, the US and Germany kept detailed records of the war's human cost. But the carnage of World War I was so extreme and pervasive, and involved soldiers and civilians from so many different nations, that historians have had a difficult time agreeing on exactly how many people lost their lives. It's hard to say, says Michael Green, an associate professor of history at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He notes that some estimates, but not others, have included deaths from the 1918 flu pandemic and the Armenian genocide committed by Turks of the Ottoman Empire, events which overlapped with the war and were intertwined with it. World War I, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict that lasted from 1914 to 1918. It involved many of the world's great powers, primarily divided into two alliances. The Allies, which included countries such as France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and eventually the United States, and the Central Powers, which consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. The war was triggered by a complex web of political, economic, and territorial tensions that had been building up in Europe for decades. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo, Bosnia, by a Serbian nationalist, served as a catalyst for the conflict. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, and when the terms were not fully met, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. The alliances among European powers quickly escalated the situation. Russia mobilized to support Serbia, Germany declared war on Russia, and soon a chain reaction of declarations of war followed. The war expanded beyond Europe, reaching colonial territories in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The conflict was characterized by trench warfare on the Western Front, with soldiers enduring harsh conditions, constant artillery bombardments, and deadly battles. The Eastern Front saw large-scale battles between the Russian and Central Powers forces. New technologies, such as machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and aircraft, changed the nature of warfare but also led to immense casualties. The war took a heavy toll on human lives. Around 10 million military personnel lost their lives directly in battle or due to war-related injuries and illnesses. The civilian population also suffered greatly, with an estimated 7 million civilian deaths caused by factors like disease, famine, and displacement. In addition to the loss of life, World War I had far-reaching political, social, and economic consequences. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war in 1919, imposed heavy reparations and territorial losses on Germany, contributing to economic instability and sowing the seeds for future conflicts. The aftermath of World War I led to the collapse of empires, such as the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, the redrawing of borders, and the creation of new nations. The war also paved the way for significant social changes, including increased political participation for women and the spread of new ideologies like communism. Ultimately, World War I marked a turning point in world history, shaping the course of the 20th century and beyond. It set the stage for World War II and had a profound impact on global geopolitics, economics, and society. Higher toll among Allied forces. A 2011 report by the Robert Schuman European Center, pulled from government records and research by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, estimated that slightly more than 9.7 million military personnel from more than 24 nations lost their lives, plus more than 6.8 million civilians who died from causes such as starvation and genocide. In all, about 16.5 million people died. According to the report, the victors of the war suffered more military deaths than the losers. The Allied side, including Britain, 885,138 deaths, France, 1,397,800, Russia, 1,811,000, Italy, 651,000, Serbia, 275,000, and the US, 116,708, in addition to a host of other nations, lost 5.4 million military personnel. That's considerably more than the approximately 4 million military members lost by the Central Powers, which included the German Empire, 2,050,897, Austria-Hungary, 1,100,000, the Ottoman Empire, 2,150,000, and Bulgaria, 87,500. Those totals include both combat-related deaths and fatalities from accidents, disease, and the ordeal of being held as prisoners of war. The actual death toll may have been even higher. As French anthropologist François Héron notes, France's implausibly precise official death toll of 1,357,800, for example, probably was closer in reality to 1.5 million. Advanced warfare exacts heavier death tolls. Why did so many soldiers and other military members lose their lives? One reason is that, compared to previous conflicts, warfare had become more technologically advanced, Green explains. World War I was the first with trench warfare, large use of submarines and airplanes, and poison gas, as well as flamethrowers and machine guns. Particularly at the start of the war, military tactics and strategy didn't take into account the advances in killing technology. As French historian Antoine Prost notes in the 1914-1918 International Encyclopedia of the First World War, infantry trained to use obsolete tactics would charge across open fields at artillery and machine guns, resulting in massacres. According to Prost, during the first 4 months of the war alone, the French army lost 310,000 soldiers, leading a then-young lieutenant named Charles de Gaulle to later write that, in an instant, it appeared that any bravery in the world could not prevail against firepower. De Gaulle survived to become France's leader in exile during World War II, and eventually served as French president from 1959 to 1969. On this new, terrifying sort of battlefield, the biggest lethal threat was death inflicted from a distance by artillery shells. According to Prost, 60% of wounded French soldiers were injured by artillery shells, compared to 34% from bullets and 6% from bayonets and other causes. The inability of either side to quickly win the war also exacerbated the death toll. It led to brutal, protracted struggles such as the Battle of the Somme, which lasted from July to November 1916. As both sides pounded each other with firepower in a relatively small 18-mile stretch along the Somme River in France, 20,000 British soldiers were killed on the first day of the fighting alone. Infections, 1918 pandemic spread. Along the Western Front, where the two sides were mired for years in brutal trench warfare, the heavily manured soil contributed to the death toll by encouraging the growth of tetanus and gas gangrene that killed injured soldiers, according to the Imperial War Museums. The war also made the 1918 influenza pandemic even more deadly. The flu spread rapidly among American soldiers as they gathered in training camps and traveled across the Atlantic to ports such as Brest, France. It continued to surge as they went into battle. In October 1918, as U.S. soldiers fought the Germans in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, 1,451 Americans died from the flu. In the course of the war, the pandemic killed a total of 45,000 American troops and 14,000 Germans, and as many as 100,000 soldiers on both sides, according to Dutch medical researchers Peter C. Weaver and Leo van Bergen. The prolific slaughter continued right up until the war's final days. Even after German, British and French officials gathered in a railroad dining car north of Paris in the early morning hours of November 11, 1918 and signed an armistice, a 6-hour delay in the end of the fighting, intended to provide time for the news to reach the front lines, cost the lives of nearly 3,000 more soldiers. Those final casualties included an American, Sergeant Henry N. Gunther, who charged a German machine gun nest and was shot to death just 1 minute before peace officially came. Even soldiers who survived World War I may have had their lifespans shortened by the conflict. Though only 2 to 3% of soldiers exposed to mustard gas on the battlefield lost their lives, the rest may have been at higher risk of developing cancers later in life, as military writer James Patton notes. A 2014 study of soldiers from New Zealand soldiers who served in World War I found that war survivors, about 40% of whom had been wounded, had a life expectancy that was 1.7 years shorter than a group who hadn't been sent into combat. They also had a higher suicide rate than civilian men in their age group, suggesting that exposure to the war's horrors had taken its own heavy toll. It is estimated that around 10 million military personnel died as a direct result of World War I. Additionally, approximately 7 million civilians are believed to have died due to war-related causes, such as disease, famine, and other consequences of the conflict. The total estimated death toll for World War I is roughly 17 million people. It's important to note that these numbers are approximate and can vary depending on the sources and methodologies used for calculating them. Thanks for watching.